everyone. Welcome back to another episode of our Cars Reading Skills Workshop of the Jack Westin MCAT podcast. As always, I'm joined by our co-host, Jack Westin himself. Jack, it's lovely to be here with you and talk about this absolute, pleasure of a passage, Wittgenstein and Mathematics. I know
Right,
you love this one, Jack.
right. I mean, last week I said that passage we went over, polygamy, the daily passage for last week was common, right? 4 out of probably 9 passages are similar to this. This one, I would say maybe 1 out of the 9, right? You'll see something as dense or as difficult. So it's still really good practice because if you get this as your first passage, you may freak out and it might completely derail you for the other passages that are easier. So learning how to read difficult, dense passages like this is a good skill to have, and I'm excited to work on that.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, of course, we do these episodes all the time, right? What we're going to do is go through one of our Jack Weston daily passages, sentence by sentence. We'll talk about what we need to know and what is fluff, right? Or what is, maybe helpful to provide context, but not critical for the questions. And of course, given that this is for cars passages, we do all types of passages. This passage is the daily on our website from September 17th. It is a doozy. If you are listening to this passage on, or this episode on September 17th, feel free to navigate to jackweston.com if you'd like to get a quick scan or read of this passage before we get started. If you're listening after September 17th, you could always navigate to the description of this episode wherever you found it, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever, and you can give this passage a read. We always recommend to do so before we get into the meat of the passage, so to speak, just because it'll give you something to compare it to, right? When we talk about it, we'll go over common student concerns, but it's great to have a first-person account of your experience with this passage to compare against the things that we're talking about. So if you have not already done so, we always recommend it. But we're going to go ahead and hop in with this. As always, we'll go sentence by sentence and try and figure out how to approach a passage like this. Especially if it's your first one, it's always good to have exposure to a passage of this difficulty level. So let's go ahead and hop in. We'll start with sentence 1 of paragraph 1. And I apologize, by the way, in advance if I mispronounce this name. It's Ludwig Wittgenstein, right? So Ludwig Wittgenstein's relationship to mathematics can reveal surprising things about his philosophy. Okay, I feel like this first sentence is not too bad. We have this individual. We're talking about how his relationship with mathematics, right, reveals philosophical ideas, right? So there's some relationship between mathematics and philosophy for this particular individual. We can use one to understand the other. I don't know who this person is by name, but I guess, he's got some sort of ideas with mathematics and philosophy. That's all I have to go on.
Right.
So let's see what else we get. This is actually a 2-sentence paragraph, so very short. The second sentence says, in fact, whereas his views on language seem to bifurcate his thought into, quote, early and, quote, late periods, his understanding of math creates consistent affinities. Okay, so maybe different views on language, same views on math. I feel like this sentence is a lot less direct than the one that came before. I may not be paying quite as much, not paying attention, but that one doesn't jump out as quite as important as the sentence before.
Right. It says something about his views on language.
Mm-hmm.
Is new. We've never talked about language.
Mm-hmm.
Bifurcate. So they separate in a way, right? There's a distinction between his early and his late, okay? His understanding of math creates consistent affinity. So something about language seems to be inconsistent. There's an early and a late, and then his understanding of math is consistent. So kind of, again, a little complicated, not so easy to understand, but we do know we're talking about philosophy. We do know we're talking about mathematics and potentially language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like the tendency for most students is like, oh, well, I guess language must mean philosophy. But we don't know that. We don't really know anything about why we're bringing in language. We got to wait until we get discussion of that, if we ever do, um, especially given how short this first paragraph is. So, Wittgenstein's thoughts on mathematics help us understand his philosophy. That's pretty much what we can get.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
yeah. All right. Well, let's make our way into paragraph two. This one's a little bit longer. It says Wittgenstein's discussion of mathematics in his early Tractatus is brief. So I'm assuming this is a work of, maybe it's a work of mathematics or a work of literature. It is italicized, so it's some proper noun. And it doesn't describe mathematics very much. I it seems like we're setting up context. There's not much tangible information presented here yet.
Okay. Yeah. Again, not so common, but the whole Tractatus thing, I do know that's a book, right? Or some sort of piece of work because it's italicized.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. The reason is that mathematics, he says, is a kind of logic. And so presumably all he asked or all he has said about logic applies to mathematics. Okay. So we understand that Wittgenstein must argue mathematics is a kind of logic. I think that inherently is an argument, but I think the word presumably also really jumps out. This is an argumentative word, right? Or it should help us recognize that this is a opinion, right? We are
Yeah.
presuming something, right? We are assuming something, or we are like kind of connecting dots that have not officially been connected yet. So math is logic, and because of that, all of these logical ideas apply to mathematics, or all of his ideas on logic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's pretty easy to understand, and we understand it's his opinion, right?
Mm,
Wittgenstein. So in this case, that's all we know, right? I mean, that's pretty straightforward. So mathematics is a kind of logic. Okay.
hmm Yeah, and I don't know what all he has said about logic, but it applies. I feel like that only helps if you know what he said about logic, but to the author, it seems important. Um, okay, our next sentence is super brief. It says mathematics is made up only of rules. That's short and sweet and an argument as well, right? Rules, logic, mathematics, they kind of all go hand in hand.
That's right. Yeah. Good. Okay.
All right. Mathematical propositions, just like the tautologies of logic, and we've got a parentheses here, such as A equals A or, quote, man is a mortal being, this end quote, end parentheses, do not represent any facts because they are, in a certain sense, merely grammatical. Okay, I feel like this is getting much less clear. I'm understanding that mathematical propositions are just like logic. Okay. And this is not factual, they're grammatical. They lose me on the it's grammatical, but I
I'm
understand that
so
it's,
yeah.
yeah, math and logic are similar. That helps me. I already knew that. I'm going to call this, support and move on.
Dude, this is very dense. And at this
Yeah.
point, many students are panicking because they're thinking, should I just skip this passage, go to another passage?
Yeah.
I would say I like these kind of dense passages, especially philosophy, because the questions are typically
Questions.
very straightforward.
Yeah.
You don't get so intimidated by every paragraph and you just focus on what you do know. I mean, so far, the only thing that I know is that this guy thought mathematics is a kind of logic and
Mhm.
rules, and it's based on rules, and it says only of rules, so it's pretty extreme on that. Uh,
Yeah.
outside of that, just go with the flow, right? I'm not saying, shut your mind off and don't read, but if you don't get it, don't panic, right? Just continue with what you do know.
hmm Yeah. So let's finish up paragraph two. It says their content can be anything. We see a semicolon. I'm assuming we're still talking about logic and mathematics. And then it says it is the rules of syntax that matter, the rules that stipulate what can be said. Okay. I mean, I understand that we're talking about math and logic. And then I just saw the word rules twice. And those were like the few things that I perfectly understood from this paragraph. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. Math and logic and rules are all tied together, right? Mathematics relates to both.
That's it. That's all we need to know from this paragraph.
What a gift that is, right? Hopefully, to anyone listening who read this on your own, or read this on their own, or is just listening, it's okay if you come across a sentence that's complicated, right? There is a point where it gets so dense that you do your best and you keep moving, right? Rather than getting stuck and starting to kind of spiral in the self-doubt that can lead you to struggle with the passage as straightforward as maybe last episode's passage. Um, have confidence in your reading. If it doesn't make sense to you and you're reading carefully, keep reading, right? Maybe that was not a sentence that was going to be critical for the questions.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, let's take a look at our third paragraph. Again, we're coming out of the idea in paragraph 2 that Wittgenstein is thinking mathematics is a type of logic made up of rules, right? All right. Wittgenstein was later to reject many of the assertions of his treatise about language. Okay, so we had mentioned language earlier. That was the other like variable in the first paragraph. So we know language again kind of divided. There was a early, there was a later. Sounds like that's kind of what we're hitting at. Something about language changes in terms of his belief or his understanding. I don't know how. I don't know what it was originally, but
Right.
it's changing.
Right. That was something they brought up earlier, right? There was some sort of
Mhm.
something that was different. Okay.
Yeah. All right. That discontinuity in his thinking is what divides his thinking into early and later Wittgenstein. So this we kind of hit at before. Again, there was earlier and there's a later. So, okay, we know that he changed his mind on language. That is important to understand. I don't know what his early or later thoughts on language was in specific, but I do know that this is an important division, right? There's something before and something later about language.
Good.
Hopefully they clarify.
Yep.
Okay, in place of the early monolithic view of language, where all language must follow the same set of rules, the later Wittgenstein speaks of many different, quote, language games, each with its own set of rules. So we're talking about early and later here, and we're kind of getting hints of what we're later going to understand. What it sounds like is we had one view of language and now there's multiple, or there's different layers. I think this sentence is a little bit complicated, but I do think that there's parts of it that we can pick out. Instead of all language follows one rule set of rules, now there's multiple types of language that has
It's
rules.
just so weird because now we're talking about languages,
I
right?
know. What happened to math?
Mathematics and logic and rules, but what like it's such a 180, right?
Mhm.
And this is where a lot of students may get tied up, may get like just really just surprised and bewildered, right? And I don't blame you. But
Yeah.
go with what they're saying, right?
Hmm.
Continue. Okay.
Hmm. Okay. From thinking there was only one correct form of language, he eventually comes to think that there are several forms of language. Okay. I mean, I feel like this is kind of the same thing as the sentence before, but it's just so much more clear than the sentence before. So the change that we alluded to earlier on language was there's only one correct form, and now there are multiple. So again, it's kind of diverging from one to multiple as time goes on for this individual. I don't know how that relates to mathematics, but that's something that I can grasp.
Yeah.
Um,
Later and earlier, the view
mm,
change. So
mhm.
early and later. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. One to multiple types of language. That's the change. All right. The language of the home behaved differently than the language of the workplace or the gym or the schoolyard. So, okay, it's just kind of giving you a list of different types of language, right?
Right.
It's basically different contexts for language. That seems to be the different forms that they're talking about. They're just like listing a few. It
Yes.
helps
And
us understand for
yeah,
sure.
this is just exactly just elaborating on on the argument, right? And it's an argument because we don't know for sure. We can't really know how to define language and whether there is really just one form or many. Uh,
Hmm.
So we just have to go with what the author is saying.
Yeah. And who knows, some people might talk the same at home as in the workplace and at the gym and the schoolyard, right? Like they're using those as lists of different types of language, but maybe they're all the same for some people. Who knows? It's an argument. Okay, there are some things that can be said in one language that would not make sense in another. So again, they're making this argument very clear. There are different types of languages. Okay, this is the argument. Um, some people may not speak differently in different contexts, but again, that's what they're presenting to us. Okay, in the early Wittgenstein, the quote, interesting nonsense, and it seems, by the way, that these quotes may be coming from Wittgenstein. There's no direct, very direct, like Wittgenstein said, but I think that's something that we can glean from this. So, the interesting nonsense, so to speak, that characterizes the vast majority of the claims of philosophy results from the violation of the rules that govern the bounds of all meaningfulness. Okay, Jack, lead us through how to analyze this because I think most students are going to read this and say, "Huh? Interesting nonsense,
Yeah.
violating rules that govern bounds of all meaningfulness."
I think this is all consistent with this idea that there are several forms of language. I wouldn't
Mhm.
suggest that there is anything really testable here, and you have to go with what you already understand.
Yep.
Right? We already understand. I think a lot of students underestimate the importance of very simple sentences, and they overestimate the sentences that are super complex, right?
Yes.
And so in our case, we need to just be confident with what we know and try our best to understand it in that context.
Yeah. I almost feel like doing a passage like this for many, many students feels like trying to like fumble their way through the dark. Like there's just so much that they're wading through. And when you find a simple sentence, it's like running into a wall. It's like, okay, well, keep your hand on that wall. At least you know you won't run into it again, right? Like this is the one thing that I'm going to cling to. At least this is the solid thing that I can hold on to, right? Like don't undervalue those straightforward sentences because if you are debating understand a straightforward sentence or understand this interesting nonsense, to quote the passage, the straightforward one's going to be a lot more useful.
Right. Absolutely.
All
Okay.
right. One last sentence here in paragraph 3. It says, in the later Wittgenstein, the interesting nonsense is a result of confusing the rules of one language game with those of another. So we're talking about interesting nonsense again. It's the same phrase that they're saying, but it seems like it's being used, this discussion of interesting nonsense is being used to further the idea that there are different types of language, right? It seems like this is something that comes around when language is confused, but that in itself inherently agrees with the argument that came before, right? That there's multiple types of languages, and that's the new or later belief. Before we thought there was only one.
Right. It is this whole idea of nonsense or interesting nonsense is very complex, but I think what they're really trying to say is nonsense results from confusing language rules, right? And
Yes.
these rules of language causes nonsense to be developed. Okay.
Hmm.
But again, I wouldn't focus on that. I would focus more on the idea that Wittgenstein had, two views of language, right? Changed over time, right? From the early and the later. And this idea that there is really no correct form of language. There are several forms of language.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are all coming from the clearer sentences. So those are the ones to hold on to. So paragraph 4, it says consistent with or between the two Wittgensteins, even here, is the belief that all philosophical problems arise from confusion about language. Ah, okay. So, first of all, this jumps out as something that's consistent between the early and later. That is important to know right? We've established why they're different, but this is now something that's true of both. And also, this is now connecting philosophy and language. We had previously said or alluded to the fact that mathematics and philosophy may be related, but now we're talking about philosophy and language.
That's
So,
a great point. Yeah, it's so weird. We went from mathematics and philosophy, to language, and now we're connecting language to philosophy. So,
uh, yeah, it's this weird love triangle between these three, these
right.
three seemingly different concepts. Um, yeah, very interesting. But okay, so basically, we're saying language confusion leads to philosophical problems. And that's consistent in early and later. Like, this is not something that has a particular time point, right? This is a unifying idea. So interesting, right? We'll see how it connects.
Right.
The later Wittgenstein came to place much more emphasis on the social aspects of rule following. Okay, so we're seeing a comment about what's going on later, and we're talking about rules again and societal relationships, but I'm not exactly sure how that relates to language and philosophy. We're saying that social aspects are more important later, but I feel like it might be made more clear if this is something that we need to understand very well.
Okay.
Okay, rules are embodiment or embodied in social forms of behavior. Okay, I feel like, you've said it twice now. Rules have to do with behavior, right? They're present in these social behaviors or they're embodied in social behaviors. That that's pretty straightforward. Do I know exactly how this is going to relate or how it's going to connect? Maybe not, but I do know that so far we've talked about philosophical problems coming from confusion about language, and rules are present within behavior or social behaviors
It is really all coming together in a weird, twisted way because we've only spoken about rules in the
with
context of
mathematics.
mathematics, right? And so this is maybe alluding to something. We'll have to see. But yeah, all we need to know is it's pretty direct, right? Rules kind of are embodied, present in social behavior. We all know that, right? There's some rules around social behavior. Okay.
hmm hmm And be careful if you're thinking, I know psych soc, I know all about norms and, taboos and all of those things. Rules have to do with social behavior. Don't go off into a psych soc tangent in your head. Focus on what is being said in front of you. Um, the last sentence here of paragraph 4 says, even the law of non-contradiction, and we have in parentheses, A cannot equal not A, okay, wasn't to be regarded as absolute. We're about to get a long quote, but I mean, we're saying that this law is not absolute, which is interesting, right? We are about to get a quote, presumably from Wittgenstein. So the quote says, "We see contradiction in a quite different light if we look at its occurrences and its consequences as if it were anthropologically, that is to say, then as it were anthropologically. That is to say, we shall look at it differently if we merely try to describe how the contradiction influences language games." Okay. I usually, whenever I see a that is to say or like put simply, I get very excited because it means the author's about to take a complex topic and put it really simply. But I'm not, I don't love this sentence as a whole, right? It sounds like, again, you're right. We're connecting rules and laws and language and philosophy. I don't think this is brand new information, at least not new information that's concrete enough to track. But I feel like it's close enough to what we've talked about before to feel confident in the ideas we've already pulled out.
Right. I mean, when you see a dense passage like this, hit the brakes, go a little slower to make sure you've been trying to pay attention to it all. I think that's the hardest part is staying focused for such a dense passage.
Hmm
It really takes a lot of mental willpower. And so from this paragraph, all you need to really know is this idea that Wittgenstein thought all problems in philosophy arise from like confusion about language. which may
Mhm.
make sense since language doesn't have like a perfect form, right? There isn't
Mm.
one specific correct form for language. And this idea that rules are embodied in social forms of behavior, so that rules are in social behavior. I think those are the only two things you really need to pick out from this paragraph. And they're
Mhm.
deep, they're pretty dense to understand. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you just got to do your best. Have confidence and keep moving. Don't get stuck. Okay, we've got 2 paragraphs left. Let's look at paragraph number 5. It says, at this point, Wittgenstein's attitude toward mathematical logic seems to have changed in a way similar to his understanding of language. He moved from thinking that there was one type of mathematical logic to thinking that there were different kinds. Okay, guess what? We're back to mathematics. We were on mathematics and philosophy and logic, and then about language, and then about language and philosophy. And now we've arrived at mathematics and language. We're not saying that those were the same thing, but we are drawing a parallel. We're saying that this attitude evolved in a similar way. Attitude toward math evolved in a similar way to the attitude towards language. And we understand that there are multiple ways or multiple different types of mathematics. So it's kind of
Yeah.
drawing a parallel. We're not saying that they're the same, but they are similar in the way he thought about them.
Finally, there's a connection,
I
right?
know.
Okay, sounds good. So mathematics doesn't have one clear form. There could be several, right? Several kinds of mathematics, just like how there could be several kinds of language, right? And we
Yes.
know that several kinds of language lead to problems in philosophy. Okay, all right. So let's
Mhm.
say maybe several kinds of mathematics leads to several kinds of logic, right? Or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Okay, the idea that each game has its own rules was meant to subvert the monolithic version of rule following that characterized such philosophies of mathematics like Russell's Principia Mathematica. Now, in one sentence, we're talking about rules and philosophies of mathematics. I don't know who Bertrand Russell is. Again, it we had that word monolithic brought up earlier with language. We said there was one idea of like there's one type of language and now there's multiple. It seems like we're still continuing to describe the fact that he's realizing that there's multiple types of math too. Um, but I mean, I don't know Principia Mathematica, so I think we're still moving in the same direction. That's the most important point to follow.
That's right. This is very complicated, and I don't think there's anything really clear and cut that we need
Yeah,
to focus on.
yeah. All right. Whereas the early Wittgenstein had labored hard with Russell on problems of logic, semicolon, I feel like that should be a comma because we've got a sentence fragment, but we're saying Wittgenstein labored on logic. The later Wittgenstein came to regard the entire field as a quote curse. So, I mean, it sounds like he's trying to find this one logic or this one mathematics. And now, I mean, it's not written, but it feels like he's kind of given up, right? Later, he's just like, this is a curse. This whole field is a curse, right? Like clearly, again, the view on mathematics has changed. There's not one mathematics, there's multiple, just like language.
Right. That's all we need to know, right? This idea that mathematics is sort of like language, specifically that there could be more than one kind of mathematics. That's it. If we know that, I think we're going to be fine.
Yes. Yeah, and we've used logic and rules so many times when talking about mathematics that that characterization is present again and again, right? Um, they use mathematical logic as if it's one word, right? They're also helping us understand mathematics.
That's right.
Okay, we've got one last paragraph, right? So buckle up, one more. It says, still, even between the early and later Wittgenstein, there is agreement enough on many issues, including fundamental questions in the philosophy of mathematics. Here we are again about the philosophy of mathematics. Um, it sounds like we've been highlighting differences in the opinion, but there are certain things that are the same. So there are things that we agree on. They haven't stated them yet, but if they do go into things that are the same, then I'm going to be aware of that, right? And maybe I'll track that. For now, I just know that there are issues that are consistent. So I'm ready to find out, right? We've got what, 3 or 4 more sentences left. It says Wittgenstein's view of rule following changed, but he remained committed to the claim that the entire nature of mathematics unfolds from rule following. Okay, that sounds pretty similar to what we had initially said in paragraph 2. Again, math is logic and math is rules. Mathematics, the entire nature has to do with rule following. I mean, that sounds familiar. I feel like this whole sentence is a little abstract, but at least the idea of mathematics and rules being tied, that's not new. That's from paragraph 2.
Right, right. It's just bringing everything back together, and I don't feel like they've given us a clear argument in this paragraph yet. I would continue reading and see where it's going.
Yeah. All right. Both early and later Wittgenstein then are in agreement that mathematics is a form of logic.
Oh my gosh, that's
There we
exactly
go.
what I'm talking about in
Mm-hmm.
the very beginning of this passage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So we
It
found
all
an
comes
idea
back.
that is repeating.
Mm-hmm. Finally. It's about time, right, Jack?
Yeah. Second paragraph. This idea was literally the same exact idea we talked about in the second paragraph. And this is the only idea that I really see that repeats.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe this idea that language is also not, there's not one clear form of language, right? Like I
Yeah.
think that might be important too, but this is pretty obvious.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Math is logic and logic is rules, right? Or math and logic and rules are all kind of on the same playing field here, right? They are all related. Um, okay, final sentence of the passage. As he says in the Tractatus, quote, there will never, and that's in italics, be surprises in logic, and hence none in mathematics either. So again, logic and mathematics are being brought together. I really feel like that most recent sentence is as clear as we're going to get, right? Paragraph 2, let's cling to it. That is really the only relationship that has been clear and repeated. Math and logic and rules are all related and, they're all parts of math.
That's it. That's it. So what's the main idea here? What should we really know? I mean, I think one real major thing that kept repeating is Wittgenstein's idea of mathematics is a kind of logic and rules, right? That repeated in the second paragraph, it repeated in the last paragraph. I would also understand that his view on language changed, right? From one form being perfect to multiple forms. So I would know
Mm.
that idea as well. But really, the mathematics being a kind of logic and rules is really the key here. And it kind of took us through like this roller coaster of ideas around logic and behavior and all that. I would still know those ideas because they could definitely ask questions that are specific to one paragraph. But I wouldn't be surprised if most questions stem from the main idea for this passage. And if you know that, you're golden. You're going to get like all the questions right.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you alluded to at the beginning, when you have a passage that's this difficult, especially with this many ideas that are all so unclear, they really do, I feel like, do you a solid, right? The questions are mostly main idea questions. If you understand the basic gist of the passage, there are things that you can get correct. Which is why you never judge a car's passage in question set by the passage, right? You never judge a book by its cover. Just because the passage looks hard doesn't mean the questions will be, right? So don't go skipping around because you're intimidated. Just keep reading, do your best. And, oftentimes you'll be rewarded for that if you see a passage like this, which is kind of nice. Helps us hold out hope.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So just, key is don't give up.
Yeah.
Practice this. If you can practice a lot of these kind of philosophy passages, which you can do in our QBank, it's free. Go to our QBank, go to the AMC style passages and filter for philosophy passages. Just read these every day. You're gonna have a much easier time reading every other passage, right? Because I think philosophy is really one of the harder topics for most students. But you should also be very happy because typically the questions are very straightforward. Harder the passage, easier the questions, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So,
And by the way, just in case we have any course students that listen, in which case, hi, course students. If you are subscribed to our subscription plan for the self-study course, or if you're in one of our live courses, know that you can also sort the dailies by subject, by CARS topic. And, with our course access comes also access to the pre-recorded workshops on these. And a lot of our passages have workshop breakdowns, including this one. So if you really want to work on philosophy passages and you are, part of our courses, you can also sort for all philosophy passages and do practice on ones that have pre-recorded sessions on them as well. It's a nice way to get feedback on the way that you're reading it if we don't happen to cover it in one of our CARS reading skills workshops. So it's just another resource to help you guys get prepared and get confident when it comes to CARS. I love helping students with that too.
awesome.
So with that being said, again, please give these questions a try. This passage has 5 questions associated with it. If you struggle with the passage and you're feeling better now, or even if you still feel a little lost, give the questions a try. Again, oftentimes you get an easier question set when you see a more difficult passage. So go ahead and give these a try. We hope that you enjoyed this walkthrough of a passage that's so tough. And if you take one thing from today's CAR Skills workshop, right, it's keep reading. If you feel overwhelmed, but you know that you're reading confidently and carefully, if it doesn't make sense, keep moving, right? Look for those more clear sentences and cling to them, because those are what will help you find the main idea. And the main idea will get you all the questions that you can. Okay, so keep the confidence up, keep practicing. And we hope to catch you in our next CARS Skills workshop. Until then, happy studying and have a great rest of your day.